I actually didn't realize how close we were to the 100th episode of My Hero Academia. 2 episodes to go before we reach episode 100, and I got a feeling it's gonna be explosive, and this episode was insane. Deku being able to tap into the true potential of his quirk is something that's been definitely foreshadowed, been heavily implied, but the extent of how far they're going to go with it was something even I couldn't guess, because it felt more like, okay, yeah, maybe he'll get more powerful, maybe all the quirks and all the people who've been working together will just make him really, really strong. And no, seemingly he's gonna have a utility belt at his disposal, and depending on how he feels, it will definitely influence how it's used, which anger and ferocity is something that he definitely has to keep in check, otherwise a lot of bad things could happen. And while watching this take place, not only did I felt like it was built up very well, it didn't feel like it was coming from thin air, didn't feel like, oh, this is an author who said, okay, we're so many chapters into this story, I need something to change it up. No, this has been something that ever since, I think the initial glance that we ever got like foreshadowing this was Shinzo versus Deku back when they first had their original match. We saw the eyes glowing from the doorway. There might have been something before then, but that's the first one that I remember. And for a long time, there's been a lot of uncertainty about this ability and visions and things like that. And when you really look at Deku as a character, how much further could we take his base power of speed and strength and really make it that interesting for building it up? Because it feels like we're entering a stage of My Hero Academia with the villains and things like that. They're clearly up to no good. Endeavor's probably going to get screwed over in some way there. It feels like playtime is almost over, which is one of the reasons I've really enjoyed this arc, because we get essentially Season 1 style content with Season 5 level development. The characters a lot more experienced, characters who we thought probably never would get experience are, so it felt like this was the last hurrah before everything goes to shit. So by having it activate here and having him essentially use whips in order to try to capture his opponents didn't go over well, but still, it's something that starts to get your mind racing. He essentially has become Batman of quirks, and it doesn't feel overpowered. Maybe my opinion will eventually change when I see him use more and more, but as it stands, it almost says to me his base and normal power that he'll always be using is the one that he inherited from All Might. Super strength, speed, his shoot style, all that type of stuff, that will be his base, but when he needs to capture an opponent, should he master it, he can tap into this man's quirk and basically use these whips, which have grown a lot more powerful as more users have joined in to the sphere that has been kind of growing and growing to the point where it's finally unlocked and the time has finally come. I think in a lot of cases this would be worrisome, because you'd say, okay, well, if he can use like 8 abilities, right? It's said in this episode, because if we look at Deku's power, that's 1, the whip is number 2, and this man says there's 6 other quirks that he'll get to be able to use depending on the situation. The entire reason that this man's quirk activated was because his quirk was best suited for what he needed to do. So that means he'll have 8 things that he can use, and that's pretty ridiculous. As it stands right now, it's no real different than that of Todoroki. Hot and cold, fire and ice, he has 2 abilities. So as it stands, having something that can basically be like a whip or an attack, a defense, all that stuff, but it doesn't feel like it's ever going to be overpowered. It feels more like, even when it does get to the point where you're like, okay, no one can beat him, he's clearly number 1 hero, that's when the story would end. And if we look back at Season 1, Episode 1, the story starts off with Deku narrating from the future, this is the story of how I became the number 1 hero. So as we watch these arcs, I really don't feel like we're going to get to the point where it's going to feel shitty, as if the author gave him too much to work with. In many ways, I think having this many quirks will cause him more of a hindrance than will be a gift, especially if everything hits the fan before he can master his seemingly newfound strength. That's really cool, and I think the fact that Shinzo was, the whole reason everything didn't go to shit, and as soon as everything was back to normal, they resumed the match, it's really cool, and it sets in motion something completely different and seriously kind of frightening but badass all wrapped up into one. I thought they did a great job with just the flash, the spectacle, the way they animated it. It felt as if it really did feel like a nuclear bomb going off, and anyone who gets close to Deku could end up in a coma. That's how bad it was feeling. So to have, a cute reunion scene, someone who is really inspired by Deku, is very much in love with Deku, be one of the reasons why he didn't go completely haywire, not upset that she got a little hurt by him. Obviously, he would be very upset, given the relationship there, but still, it just felt like something that was supposed to really make you say, we already knew the villain stuff was going to change everything, but having this happen in the middle of seemingly a very normal, tame training arc, I mean, that's kind of incredible. And I was loving this episode before even that stuff happened. I mean, you kick the episode off hinting at such, like, hey, like seriously, something is going to awaken. Clearly it's going to be in Deku. Otherwise, why would he be the main character in this story when, you know, it clearly is as such. Deku will be the one who will change everything. And I think it kind of makes sense given the fact that, you know, he was someone who had nothing and seemingly gained everything. He works probably the hardest out of anyone. So it's really cool to see that and to see just the normal match take place. Very similar to that of Bakugo's. In fact, you could argue minus maybe the ability to track and sense movements, it's pretty much the exact same build. The main difference is the fact that they have the idea of saying, okay, well, they're probably going to act very similar to that of Bakugo, so we're going to try to lure out him and probably attack his allies. So there's definitely a lot of cooperation and teamwork here, and I actually found it to be quite interesting to see a man who can copy quirks and use it to his own advantage, and how he was trying to provoke, saying like, oh, Bakugo's the reason All Might's no longer a hero, all this. He's really trying to provoke him so he'll talk, as Shinzo's waiting in the background in order to brainwash. It's really cool. I mean, it's infuriating, but I mean, it's a really good plan. And personally, I would argue Class B probably had one of the best balanced teams I've seen. You have someone who can basically levitate things that are of around a human weight, someone who can shrink it down into size. You have, obviously, copying a quirk, brainwashing. It just felt like a very balanced team effort. And it's kind of frightening. That's what I've really loved about these matches is that, you know, other than Class A just being obviously really impressive because they have all this real world experience, Class B is equally as impressive. And I think we need to have that if we're going to enter probably insanity. That, I mean, it just feels to me anyway. I don't really know anything other than the fact that there's going to be something with the villains going to be in the second half of this season. It feels like we're building up to something that might even surpass the insanity of something like the Hero Killer arc and, you know, some of the craziness we saw last season, which, if they do so, that will be absolutely incredible. I saw myself just eyes glued to the screen as always. 10 episodes into this season, it doesn't feel like there's been a slow moment. I mean, I've said it before and I'll say it again, and seemingly my comment section agrees with me. This season's absolutely hype and fire, and I just don't understand how some people could ever call it dry or boring, because it really does feel like the early stages just amplified with all the experience and new skills that they've grown over with 4 seasons, right? Insanity, and it's just, I don't even know. I'm really excited / terrified to see where the different quirks are going to go, because on one hand, it's a utility belt of powers and at his disposal. On the flip side, should the wrong thing happen, I mean, like we saw here, imagine if that would have happened during the middle of, like, fighting villains. Like, he would have ended up dead, right? It's a little different, so hopefully he can find a way to master this, or at the very least keep those powers at bay until he really wants to try it. But I got a bad feeling about what's going to happen to our boy Deku as he tries to master this, probably in life-threatening situations, but time will tell. Let me know your thoughts and feelings on this week's episode of My Hero Academia, your favorite moment, and where do you think is going to go with the last couple of episodes of Part 1 of this season as we enter Core 2, where probably the villains will take priority. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like, share your support, and hit that subscribe button if you happy new around here. So until next time, everyone, please take care and have a good one.